and welcome to Words of Quizdom. Today we are going to be talking to one of the bigger names of Bangalore cuisine, Professor Arul Mani. Professor Arul Mani works in the English department of St. Joseph's College and has served as the president of the Karnataka Cuisine Association for quite a while. Moreover, he is renowned nationwide as a quiz master and one of the biggest quizzers around.
Thank you so much, Professor, for being with us this evening.
Thank you. Pleasure being here.
So to start off, Professor, could you tell us about how you came to join the KQA in the first place?
Right. It's two stories, so I should tell you both stories. Right. One of how I started coming to KQA quizzes, and two, the business of actually joining the KQA. So the year is 1985, I think. Right. And I heard of KQA for the first time in the pages of a local Bangalore tabloid called the City Tab. Right? They were a weekly issue, and they were a very informal, breezy kind of journalism. Did a lot of good city Bangalore stories, and they also had very reliable entertainers like the latest Kushana Varatanaram novel and serial form. Right? So these guys had a center spread story about quizzing in Bangalore. And the provocation for the center spread story was, it was 1985, KQA was founded in 83, right? So the provocation for the story was effectively two things. One, it was the anniversary of the KQA, the second anniversary. They had sent out invitations saying they're going to do a quiz as part of the second anniversary. But more importantly, 85, there was suddenly one big spurt of interest in quizzing because Siddharth Basu had just launched one program called Quizdom. And Quizdom had one season had gotten over, right? Was it over then? 84, 85. It had just begun. Quizdom had just begun, right? And so lots of people were into about quizzing, and there were lots of things happening and so on. Right? So I'd watched Quizdom, and so when I saw that there was something in Bangalore, Quizdom happened in Delhi, right, far away. It was only for college students. I was in school. So I saw this, and that's how I heard of KQA. And I decided that I'd go to the next KQA quiz. And in a couple of weeks, there was an invite at our school saying KQA is holding this school. Yes. Okay. So we all formed a team in school. So I went to the Indiranagar High School. Right? But they invited us, and so we went. Right? And the quiz happened at State Youth Center on Rupatunga Road. And there were prelims of 40 questions, right, including some 5 visuals and 5 audios, and 30 dry questions. Right? We wrote it in great tension and somehow managed to qualify. And then the questions, it took us some time to get warmed up. Right? We started scoring only, in those days, school quizzes used to have 10 rounds, right, with 6 questions in each round. So only around the 4th round, then we were on 0, dying of embarrassment. Then we started guessing and all of that, and somehow managed to finish 3rd. Right? What we had managed to do. Our school was also very and happy and all of that. And so they kept sending us the KQA quizzes. But in the rest of that was the first quiz of the KQA season, and we took part in all the quizzes of the KQA season. It was a sum total of 3 quizzes. Right? So that's how I came to KQA quizzes. Right? Now, joining KQA, there were many ways in which you joined KQA. Right? One of the ways in which you joined KQA was to come to take quizzes and take part. Right? The second way in which you joined KQA quizzes was if Mr. Mulki noticed you at a quiz, and then so at some point in 86, right? I felt like I had arrived in the world of quizzing because Mr. Mulki called me. I was standing at a quiz, open quiz. We had not qualified, right? So after coming to school quizzes, we also started going to open quizzes, right? It was easy to go to because there was no entry fee. KQA policy was free. So I was standing around and he said, why don't you write down your address for me? Right? The moment he told me this, I nearly died of joy because it meant that I was going to be added to the KQA mailing list.
The predecessor to the WhatsApp
So
group.
once cyclostyle and sent out by snail mail, only those people who were seen as regulars and would benefit from being on the mailing list. It wasn't given to everybody like that, right? So it was like one
Predecessor to
address in block letters that was perfectly correct. And sure enough, by the end of the month, I started getting a KQA newsletter. So this started in 86, and I got all the KQA newsletters all the way down to the last one in 2000 July, right? After which the newsletter was discontinued because it was expensive. Right? There's a third part to joining KQA, and that was in the year 88 when I was doing my second PUC. Right? So KQA also had a membership, right, which nobody actually takes because you wanted to take part in quizzes, you came to the quizzes. Right? That membership thing was there, but nobody really bothered about it very much. Right? KQA membership was of two kinds. You could take an annual membership of rupees 10, or you could take a life membership of 20 rupees. Right? 20 rupees is not a small sum, but it was not a very big sum also in those days. Right? So suddenly, year 88, right? Lots of people joined the KQA family. Right? It was the year in which there was a huge spurt in formal membership. And by formal membership, I mean you filled a form, you paid the money, you were given a receipt, and the receipt said life membership and all of that. Right? The qualification for this life membership, etc., in 1988 was an interesting thing. In 1987, a gentleman named Shadan Banerjee, who used to run one All India quiz called the North Star Quiz, decided to retire. Right? He had run the quiz for many years, and he had then gotten a job in Australia. So he was going away to Australia. So he left. Right? And the North Star 1988 had a new quizmaster, a then not so well-known gentleman named Derek O'Brien. Right? Derek O'Brien was, shall we just say, a slightly shady man even when he was young. Right? He figured that there were too many people joining these, turning up for this North Star quiz, and sort of all the seasoned quizzers, right, were becoming a pain to deal with. Right? The seasoned quizzers had tumbled very fast to the fact that Derek O'Brien was a lazy quizmaster and would repeat questions as he hopped across the country, doing North Star in Chennai, North Star in Bangalore, North Star in Bombay, and so on. And so fellows who could afford things like fax machines and all of that, right, would have friends in those cities who would write down the questions and fax it to you. Right? Only some 2 or 3 guys could afford to do it. Right? Only so many people were that desperate. Right? But obviously, who was more desperate here? Derek was the guy who was more desperate because he was doing a quiz. He could have very easily set new questions for each city that he was going to. So he decided he was going to get rid of these professional quizzers. Right? So he introduced a rule in the North Star. You have to register formally for North Star quiz. He introduced a rule. He made the organizers, BATA, introduced this rule which said you had to belong to an institution to take part in the quiz. Right? So you couldn't just be a member of the general public forming a team with the 3 guys you went running in the park with on Sunday. Such guys couldn't take part in the quiz. Right? You had to be a school student, a college student, or you had to belong to a corporate organization. Right? So he thought he was being really smart and basically cutting out all the what he saw as professional quizzes were basically fellows who were neither here nor there. Right? Not all of them were in corporate employ. Right? Some of them would sort of be running a business or writing an exam or some such thing. So he thought all those guys would get knocked out properly, or more importantly, they wouldn't all be in the same organization, right? So some complicated, devious logic was behind this, right? So the moment quizzers in Bangalore heard this, they went to Mr. Mulki and said, "What is this nonsense? Why is he doing all this?" So Mr. Mulki answered them very calmly. He said, "KQA is a registered organization, right? You become members and you'll all be representing an institution." Right? So we said, "Yes, this is what we are waiting for," and we all joined KQA en masse. I still have a copy of that receipt somewhere, right? I've signed it and it says 20 rupees and it says life membership, right? So that was the only time this issue of membership in a formal form actually came up, right? And whoever joined KQA did that in 1988. After that, it was never required, right? Because KQA's own policy on membership has been you come if you're interested, right? And you hang around, you take part, you come to 3 quizzes, everyone remembers your face, and that's it. You're a member after that, right? So this is the story of my membership in the KQA. It's a multi-layered story.
That is, I don't even know what to say anymore, Professor.
And then I used to come to KQA quizzes and take part, right? And then there was one more moment of arrival, right? Once the year 91, I was about to finish college, right? Winko wrote me a letter saying, "I'd like it very much if you come and conduct a school quiz for KQA," right? So again, same feelings of great arrival and great nervousness happened, right? I sat and quiz painfully, and I traveled all the way to Rajaji Nagar, right? And then Winko had also come. We organized the quiz together. We finished at the end of the day. We had one coffee. And so there was one small organizing team for all KQA events. It was Mr. Mulki, Suresh, who was the secretary then of the KQA, and a bunch of young college boys like me, right, who came because it was a privilege to, stand around and help KQA and help Mr. Mulki. But there's one more thing that was part of it, and I have to say it without any shame, right? Winko knew human psychology really well, right? And so for all the guys who came and helped out and stayed for the whole day, helping out in various, there would always be 3-4 guys, right? He would sort of give them $50 from KQA, right? And also there would be, usually the quizzes would happen on Rupatunga Road, either at State Youth Center or later at Daily Memorial Hall, Mythic Society. Inevitably, at the end of the day, we would finish by 5:30. Quizzes never went on to 6:37 and all that later as they do now. All quizzes would end by 5:30, 5:45. We would walk down to Trupti, a restaurant in the YMCA complex, right? And Winko would treat us to a masala dosa and a coffee, and we would review the day, and then we would get our little remunerations for having helped, right? Because for fellows like us who were like permanently broke college students, right? All this was like, this is another moment of membership and arrival in KQ.
I don't even know what to say about those stories, Professor, anymore. I'll be very honest with you. I don't even know what to say about the stories anymore, Professor. I'll be very honest with you. So how has things changed? Like obviously snail mail and the newsletter have been replaced by WhatsApp, but otherwise how have things changed from? And also I wanted to hear
how have things changed.
Yes.
You can write a whole book about how things have changed, right? Because one good thing about KQA is that the informality of KQA has continued to sort of be the organizing principle. It hasn't become one rigid and stratified sort of organization. It's still anyone can come, right? It doesn't matter whether you know somebody in the association or not, right? You can come, you can take part, right? And that sort of thing. Also, the entry fee has been kept low, right? I told you that when I came to my first open quiz, I was a school kid. I didn't have to pay an entry fee. That continues, right? In those days, the entry fee for a team of 4 members, right, was, this was the 80s, it was 25 rupees, right? Which was quite cheap. It was a cinema ticket would have cost 10 to 15 rupees in those days, right? So nobody minded paying, and there would always be coffee in those days after the prelims, right? So it was seen as generally worth it for one good afternoon's entertainment, right? So KQA's entry fee for open quizzes went very reluctantly from 25 to 50, right? We started with 25 rupees in 83. It became 50 rupees in 92, right? And it stayed at 50 rupees till about 2009 or 2010, when we said, okay, we don't have to keep it so low now, right? We can make it free entry for school students, have concessional entry for college students, but open quizzers can pay a little more. And that at that point, it became 100 rupees, right? But we still kept it at 100 rupees by and large, right? So that was one thing. To keep the entry fee, don't make it free of cost entirely, right? Make sure that people sort of have a sense that they are paying for something, but don't transfer the costs of the quizzing to the audience, right? That's the thing that KQA never does, right? So that's one thing we've managed to keep going, right? So apart from the informality and trying to keep quizzing affordable, which have been organizing principles from day one, quizzing itself has changed in many different ways, right? So I told you about how quizzes would sort of start sharp at 3 o'clock. There'd be many more questions, right? The prelims would have 40 questions. The finals would have 10 rounds, 8 rounds of dry questions, 1 round of audios, and 1 round of visuals. That was adhered to very firmly because visuals were super expensive in those days. We used to have to shoot 35 slides. I don't know if you've seen them on color reversal film, right? For slide projectors. And in those days, a slide would cost anywhere between 35 to 50 rupees to make.
For a single image.
Right? So practically the entry fee for one team for one slide. Right? And shooting the slide was also a cumbersome process. Right? You had to take your visuals, take it to a friend who had a camera with a tripod, and you have to shoot at the right time of the day. Right? You have to shoot it in the morning between 10 and 12, because in those days, Bangalore weather being what it was, light would quickly become horrible. Right? And unless you had a really sophisticated camera, when shooting the visual was a dicey thing. So Sunday mornings you had to book a Sunday morning with a photographer, right? Shoot the photographs, right? Then give it, wait for it to turn into sleep. That would take 1 week. You have to shoot the entire roll of 36 slides, right? And then give it to some photo flash or Wiz or some place like that. And they would take a week. And then it would come. And so the costs were huge, right? Because you have to buy the film, you have to pay for the developing and the mounting, right? And there was what also became, if there was a photographer helping you, you have to pay that guy something, right? So slides usually cost anywhere between 35 to 50 a piece, right? So this meant that visuals were always one small round in the quiz, right? And usually what Vinko would also try and do is try and come up with interesting connections between two existing visuals.
So like a short visual connect.
Right? So that would sort of minimize on costs and things like that. And sometimes visuals would be repeated if it was clear that it was a new audience and things like that. Audios used to be played off a cassette player, right? So once again, you have to find a friend who had a deck, take all your cassettes primed, play them one after the other, right? And then record them onto a blank tape and then come and play them on that tape, right? The other big trial, KQA quizzes very rarely had videos in those days because videos were just the most painful thing in the world, right? To have a video round at a quiz meant that you have to hire a television, you have to hire a VCP, a video cassette player, or a VCR, a video cassette recorder, and to make sure that that round went smoothly, you had to go like a week or two before that, find somebody who had a VCR take your VCP or VCR along, right? You have to get hold of a special jack to connect the two VCRs, right? Play all your the same audio cassette situation, have all your the moment you wanted as a clip primed, play them quickly one after the other, record them. With video cassettes, you have to be careful about one more thing. You have to check for whether the damn recording was happening, right? So you have to loop, play, record, then stop the recording, loop that, and check if the clip had recorded. So it was one whole Sunday, essentially. It was a Sunday project, right?
All
So
Sunday for
we
one
had
video.
video rounds, but only now and then. It was too much of a pain to organize it regularly, right? So obviously, when PowerPoint turned up, it was a game changer, right? Across the world, you'll have people cursing PowerPoint, right? But in Bangalore Quizzing, the guys who were around at that point will never curse PowerPoint because it simply revolutionized the whole damn thing, right? The questions themselves also, what Vinko used to do with the questions was he would type them out. He had a good typewriter at home. He would type them out. And the mode he used was something that anyone who typed in those days would have been familiar with. He typed with a carbon paper, right? Which meant that you had 1+1 copies at the very least, right? So one copy would be used for the quiz. The other copy would go into the KQA file as a record of what happened at the quiz, right? And these questions were all what would today be called cold styles, right? They were one sentence long, right? They were questions in the proper sense of the word. They would begin with a WH word, right? Sometimes Vinko would let himself go and have a two-sentence question, right? So one example of this is in the island of Crete, right? They are called Apo Podai, Apo something else, and so on. What are we talking about? Right? This was your longest question possible in a KQA quiz. One statement followed by a question. Right? Now, why were questions short like this? It was because you were reading them out. Right? There was no screen behind you to show people the question and all of that. And people had short attention span. So you had to make sure that the question was audible, didn't have to be repeated 25 times, right? People understood it as soon as they heard it. And so all questions were short, right? So these questions would be typed out. Vinko would then snip them up. That sheet on which they were typed, there would be 20 questions on each page. There would be 3 such sheets. He would snip up the questions into 20 strips, right? And these 60 strips would be put into a box, right? And you fish the questions out at random. It was a very important part of the quiz to show that the questions were being chosen at random, not directed for destruction at specific teams and things like that, right? So this is how quizzes were done, right? Very low resource use, right? Low maintenance stuff that you could very quickly put together, right? And run, right? So quizzes would start at 2 o'clock. We'd have a half an hour registration, 2:30 prelims. Prelims would get over at 3. Sometimes we would have cycle style sheets, right? And we would answer on a cycle style sheet. Sometimes the questions would be called out. Quizmasters usually preferred giving a cycle style sheet because it meant that you could control the prelim time exactly. You could give them a start time, give them a stop time. Then answers would be given out, all the familiar stuff. The finals would start in exactly 30 to 40 minutes, right? So 3:15 max, the finals would start, and by 5:15, the quiz was over, right? So even though it was very cumbersome and all of that, right? People had managed to find a way of balancing it and making it interesting and all of that, right? So all this was the norm. I remember quizzes that were done like this in the year 2000, 2001,